Hey guys, and welcome to the Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report, presented by Geico of Mobile, the first podcast to bring you the local inshore, offshore, and onshore fishing report, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. This week's sponsor is our local Geico insurance office. Everybody knows Geico has great rates on auto rates, but did you know they also have great rates on boats, ATVs, motorcycles, and personal watercraft? Give Ryan Davis a call at 251-445-0053. Not only will Ron work hard to get you the lowest premium possible, but you'll have the service you expect and can count on if you ever need to make a claim. Geico does it even more than insure your valuable items. They also offer on-the-water services like towing, battery jumps, gas delivery, and you can save by bundling these services with your insurance. If you're an Alabama saltwater fisherman, support the local insurance agent who brings you the fishing report each week. I'm Butch Theory, and this is 4th of July week. We put together, or actually Johnny Gwin, our producer over at Deep Fried Studios, took a compilation of all you guys' Hey Cap questions that you've submitted, not all of them, but we picked out some select ones, some great inshore ones, and some mixed in other ones as well. Thanks, Johnny, for doing this. And this is your guys' show. This is a 4th of July special from the Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report. You guys enjoy it. You guys keep whacking them. All right, Captain Bobby. Jennifer and Derek Hill say, hey, Cap, for someone with limited experience fishing and trying to teach his family to fish, how can I find these oyster beds and flats that have been referred to on the show many times? Also, it's a two-part question. What is considered deep water as is referred to on the last week's show for trout? So let's start with that first one. How can I find these oyster beds and flats that have been referred to on the show many times?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that top spot chart. If you can get your hands on that, and it's very easy to find, they sell them at all the tackle stores, and even some of the big box stores have them. It's the top spot chart, and it's basically it's a nautical chart that's overlaid with fishing spots. And so on that top spot chart, it shows both the beds that were already on the nautical chart, and then the ones that we added to it. When the guy came down here and did that, we helped him lay that out, and it's extremely accurate. They, where they're showing those oyster beds and the fishing, I think they call it hot spots or top spots. Anyway, but those spots, they're very accurate. Matter of fact, sometimes when I look at that map, I go like, man, I can't believe that guy just bought us lunch and we gave him all that information, and that's all he did was buy us lunch, But it's got some really good information, but all of that's real accurate. And then the other thing is, is the information that's on that chart, almost the same information is on the you can get a mapping chip for a GPS now that's got really accurate information. It'll show shells, and they're very accurate. The depths are accurate and that sort of thing. So that's the two places that come to mind for me, outside the experience that I got, but that you could just, look up and find that.
Hey, so when you said the hotspots map is everywhere, literally everywhere, the last one that I got, I found floating in the Mobile Bay one time, and
Somebody probably said, "Wait a minute, this thing doesn't work," and just threw it away.
That's right.
Yeah. So I got it. Hey, answer me another question.
And because they're waterproof too. That's right.
That's right, man. And mine even had the one I found floating in the bay had a little growth on it and everything. I cleaned the growth off.
Was a triple tail under it, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't a blackfish under it, but. Bobcat, is there anything else you know of to be able to tell that you're over hard bottom like that, with your electronics or whatnot?
Yeah, and you can with the electronics that we have now, and it's not just mine. You use yours way better than I use mine, but even mine will show when you're going over some of that, the color and the different coloring you'll get on your and you can read your owner's manual. It'll tell you what's hard bottom and what's not. And a lot of times when you start to get over that shell, if you watch it real close, it's not nearly as even as just over a sand bottom. You'll see some humps and that sort of thing. But just the coloring, the color palette on your GPS will actually even tell you if you're over shell. And then you can look for those oyster guys mark where the shell beds are, because they go back there and they oyster over that. They don't have to keep finding it all the time. So they'll mark it with just little PVC stakes. Some of the bigger reefs now they've actually put pilings around, that sort of thing. So anything that's just, if you're going by running through a bay, for example, Portersville Bay or Heron Bay or one of those, and you see a PVC stake sitting there, the reason it's there is because they're shell. It doesn't have anything to do with navigation. They put that there to mark an area where they put shell out to seed an oyster reef.
Mm-hmm.
The oysters, the fish don't care about the oysters themselves. It can be dead shell. They just care about the hard bottom. Yep. And that's what those guys put down, is they put that culch down to build the oyster reef, and that's what you're looking for. So just little things like that. Sometimes the oyster guys, especially the tongers, and they're back to doing that now, they'll put a little soft drink bottle tied to a brick or something, and that's where they left the day before. You can find little stuff like that, punch it on your GPS, and you got your own little oyster reef right there to fish. So there's a lot of other things you can do too, while you're actually out there on the water, to learn about where some of that shell is.
Right. Backing up to the electronics thing that you were talking about, paying attention to your bottom machine. When you do something, how I learned how to figure that out. That was kind of a loaded question I sent you there just to get that conversation rolling. Something I've done is, when I know I'm over oyster shell in the past, is take note of what it looks like, on your machine. Every single machine reads a little bit different. Some are, you can put the same machine in two different boats, and they're not going to read exactly the same, sure, depending on how the installation goes and transducer location, the whole 9 yards, So when you get over some areas like that, I always just say take note, you know what I mean? Because I can tell when you get in some of these tidal rivers, when you're riding over mud, to me, it looks like a slick, muddy bottom. Yep. And then when I get over oyster shell, it's real textured. The color is different, like what Bobby was just talking about. You get a much what you call a hard return, harder read yeah, on your machine and whatnot. And those are things to pay attention, and that's something I always kind of say all the time is pay attention to what you're doing when you do it.
That's right. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the same exact thing.
And taking it even one step further, what he's talking about, watching your machine. If you're idling around in those rivers or any of those places, you can learn a lot just about the shape of the bottom. Not just talking about shell, but just on the heels of what Richard's saying is, if you got to idle from point A to point B anyway, keep your eye on that machine. You'll start to see where the little ledges are, where the channel is, and start learning some of that. And then, that way when you're fishing, you don't have to constantly be watching your bottom machine. You could be up there fishing and know, like, okay, if I line up here and here, I'm going to be on this ledge and that sort of thing. Doesn't hurt. You're idling anyway. Just keep an eye on that bottom machine.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah, you and I did some of that a couple weeks ago.
And the bank, too. Make sure you're paying attention to the banks where you are. Those banks are often a telltale for those oyster shells. If there's oyster shells on the bank, it's probably going to extend out to the bottom a little ways as well.
Or 3 miles or something.
Right. I'm just saying.
You never know. That's exactly right. That's always a telltale sign. And the other thing I like to look for, too, is when you get an opportunity looking for oyster shells at a low tide. If you get an extreme low tide,
north wind,
winter, you get these big winter tides that we have when it sucks all the way out.
Just idling around.
Which is what we're getting a lot of right now.
Yep.
It's a good time.
Exactly what he's talking about.
It's a great time to ride around and look, you know.
You don't
Keep
have
your
to
eyes
be going.
open, man. If the fish aren't biting and you want to do, spend, a lot of that stuff that you can learn, to put in the memory banks for the future fishing trips,
Yep.
So there's a lot you can do scouting wise. It doesn't necessarily involve actually catching a fish. You can learn a lot about an area just by keeping an eye on the bank like that, particularly when you're talking about when a lot more of that bank is exposed. I can't tell you about how many of the places I fish now that I've gone by on a dead winter low, go like, now that explains why I've been catching fish on that one particular little area. There's an underwater point that comes out from there, big pile of shells that comes out. You wouldn't know it was there until you saw it on a dead winter low tide.
That's right.
Definitely.
That's a great tip, Bobcat. We appreciate it.
And Jennifer and Derek did ask, and I think this is kind of maybe a little too tricky because it says, what is considered deep water. But that's just, for trout. But I think that just all depends on where you're fishing. I mean, deep water in Fowl is going to be way different than deep water in Mobile.
You answered the question right there. It's all relative to where you're fishing. The deep water is relative to the area you're fishing. For example, if you're fishing Dog River, deep water there is 7 feet.
Right.
If you're fishing the Industrial Canal, deep water is 40 feet deep. So it's kind of relative to the area. So when we talk about, on the show, we start talking about fishing the deeper channels or the deeper areas, it's relative to the area you're fishing.
That's
you fish
right.
Fowl River, deep water is 14 feet. In Mobile River might be what, Rich? 30 feet, 25 feet, something like that,
feet,
so
right.
It's all kind of relative to the area. Now, one of the things that I talk about when we talk about summertime, this is more of like summertime fishing, you know, when we get out more out into the bay, is I consider anything deeper than 8 feet deep water. And so, you know, I talk about deep water there, and that's involves getting off to cooler water, you know, so that's just my definition. You won't find that in a book anywhere or anything like that, but that's when I kind of change the tactics that I'm using when I go, you know, that's my cutoff line from what I could consider shallow to deep water. But as far as like what we're talking about, you know, for the last few months when we talk about deep water, it's just relative to the area. Just like Butch said, it's just relative to the area that you're fishing.
Yep. Well, that's a great Hey Cap question. Jennifer and Derek Hill submitted that question over on our Facebook page, Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report. And this week's Hey Cap is brought to us by Coastal Conservation Association of Alabama. Check them out at ccaalabama.org.
Well, Bobby, I'm excited about this week's Hey Cap question. There's nothing like going to the expert to shorten the learning curve. Bobby, Benjamin Caraway asks us, he says, "Hey Cap, this may be a little optimistic." He says, "With the spring pattern right around the corner, when is the best time to start wade fishing for trout, and what kind of area should be targeted?"
That is a good question, and I love the optimistic part too. That's I love the right around the corner thing. That's
keep
encouraging,
dreaming,
man.
Just keep
Well, that's a relative term. You know what I'm saying? So,
right.
But he's not. You know, he's right. I mean, gosh dang, we're four weeks away from the beginning of April. So, I mean, that's
around the corner.
Yeah, it is around the corner. You know what I'm saying? But, you know, I start looking, we're talking about water temperature. You got to get up at least into your springtime temperature ranges, which is going to be when it starts to get over. And remember this part when I said over and stay over 62 degrees. It's going to, we're going to start going into this deal where you'll get these water temperature spikes. You know, when we get a few warm days, it's going to jump up over 62, but it's got to get up there and stay up there for about a week before you start seeing that transition. But, you know, maybe even longer than that. So when you start seeing those water temperatures get over 62 degrees, you know, then you're going to want to start focusing on some of the flats that are outside the mouths of the rivers. And those are good wade fishing, you know, boat areas too, obviously. But those are good wade fishing areas because those, number one, it's the right depth. Obviously, you don't want to be wading in 8 feet of water, which is where, you know, the river systems are right now. You're going to want to if you're going to wade fish, you're going to have to be in water that you can wade in. But you got to be around where the fish are too. And so they'll start to transition out of those rivers early in the pattern. So that's the water temperature range I'd look for, is when it gets 62 and stays there for a little while, and start looking at the mouths of those rivers, start seeing you'll start to see those mullet, sometimes now even pogies out there at the mouths of those rivers, the rivers and that sort of thing. That's the first place I'd look for them. And that's usually in mid to late March, early April, you know, and then as we push more into April and into even early May, you know, when it starts getting up in the upper 60s, you'll start moving down the bay and looking at places like the west end of Dolphin Island, Sand Island, the shoals by the Dolphin Island Bridge, some of the islands out there around the bays at the mouths of the rivers like Portersville and Grand Bay. You know, those are the kind of places you want to be. But that's going to be later, you know, more like I'd say probably 8 weeks from now, you know, if you're using a calendar. But again, the key is going to be the water temperature, and it's got to get on up there. And so it's just basically, if you can just kind of picture the geographies, you'll start to see them move out of these river systems and onto those shallow flats, and that's where you'll get them wade fishing.
62, you said?
That's the magic number. That's when you'll come and go out of this wintertime pattern into the spring transition.
Early wade fishing on the bottom, are you looking for anything in particular as far as shell bottom, grass, flats?
Both of those. You just said them both. That's shell and grass. That's the key. You got to be around that. They're going to be going, when they get to 62 is when they start to trigger the early part of their spawn.
Cool.
And that's what they'll spawn over. And so that's what you're targeting, is those fish, you know, going into those spawn groups. You know, of course, they're feeding while they're doing that, you know, so you obviously got to be around some bait. But, yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for is you know, hard bottom in that form, whether it be grass or shell.
Butch, I'm glad you
and
asked.
all those the places I just mentioned too. If you looked at a map or if you're familiar with those areas, every one of them I just told you is covered up with that kind of stuff.
Butch, I'm glad you asked that question about the type of bottom, because I mean, Bobby, this is something that I always struggled with. I still struggle with it, but for guys, you know, a lot of folks just can't go every weekend. I mean, we tend to think about like a weekend warrior. Some people can't even fish every week. So if they're getting out there once, twice a month, a lot of times they may want to go say, look, I'm going to plan a wade fishing trip for May. and they're planning to go, and they get out there, and they're basically having to scout and fish in the same morning. So when you get to an area that you're unfamiliar with, especially in our system where you got murkier water, it's not like you can go down always on the west end of Dolphin Island and see the grass beds. So how do you find that? I think on a previous show, we talked about how to find oysters on hard bottom. But how about grass? How do you pinpoint grass in our dingy water?
Well, same thing. It's the same thing as we talked about the shell. If you look at some of those top spot maps or even some of the newer GPSs and the mapping chips, they have those on there. They have grass beds on there. So that's the first thing I'd say. If you're just totally going blind and you don't know anything about the area, I would look at something like that. And the second thing I would do is, wait for it, subscribe to the podcast, because you'll learn a lot. You'll learn a lot right here on the, talking about that. Listen to the things that, that we were just talking about, the places I just named. You can look at that geography, and those are the kind of places you're going to want to be, So those would be the two things I would do, the easiest things to do. And then other than that, there's other sources of information. I'm not a big social media guy, but or internet guy for that matter, but there's plenty of information available there. You got to kind of read between the lines sometimes, but you can get information that way. I'm not a big fan of that. That to me is, you got to put the BS filter on some of that stuff, but I don't even like picking up on it, because you go like, I wonder if that's true. I wonder if it's not. Never mind. I don't even want to know. You know what I'm saying? I'd rather just figure it out on my own, So sometimes but those are a few things you could do right there. And then ask around. I mean, the tackle shops, there's people that'll be happy to help you.
Bobby, last nuanced wade fishing question. I got myself a new set of uninsulated waders this year. I'm looking forward to trying them out. But what water temps do you feel like you need waders in? So if somebody's wanting to be comfortable, and go out, a lot of guys are using their duck hunting waders or whatever they may have. If you want to be comfortable, when do you don the waders? What water temps?
Boy, that's a personal question. I kind of let the Captain Bob-O-meter tell me, when I need to have them on, when I need to have them on or when I don't. Here's the thing about waders. If I can just put up with that initial shock of getting in the water without them, I'm going to go without them. And let me tell you why. Ideally, I'd love to have them on every day, but here's what happens. Have we ever wade fished, us three, or being you? And have we ever wade fished together?
No.
Okay. All right. If you go wade fishing with me, I'm going to give you fair warning. You better wear some real comfortable underwear, and you better be used to do some walking, because when I wade, you're going a long ways in and out of the boat, So where I'm going with all of that is the waders are great when you're in the cool water. They're not great when you have to walk a mile back to the boat. You know what I'm saying?
Heavy too.
They're heavy and they're uncomfortable and they're hot, and then you get hot, especially with insulated waders. I have what Joe just mentioned, uninsulated, and I have insulated waders, 3 mil waders. Man, it's got to be. It's tough getting in first thing. It's tough getting in first thing. But to me, once I get in and get moving and I'm walking, and especially if I start catching some fish, I kind of forget about all of that, And then that walk back to the boat is a lot more comfortable. So, again, I wish I could just say, it's this, but it's a feel thing. I have I've been in waders and had guys jump in, with wading shorts on, and most of the time it's the other way around. I'm usually in the water without the waders and somebody else has them on. But, walking back to the boat, I'm going like, God, I wish I didn't have these things on, man, because it's a hump. Now, the thing is, when I'm on my guide trips, I got to go back and get the boat. So they get to keep fishing. So that's another reason I think I've kind of learned to
So what you're saying is always wear waders if I'm fishing with you, because I can just be like, hey, Bobby, I'm done. Go grab the boat, please.
Now, hold on for a second. Now this is paid guide trips. I forgot to put the paid guide trips. Yeah, if we're buddies, what we usually do as soon as we hit the water is whoever catches the fewest fish on this wade goes back to get the boat.
That makes sense.
That's usually how we do it. Now, if it's a guide trip, unfortunately, I'm usually the one humping it back to the boat.
That's right. That's fair. It's all fair.
Well, thanks for the report this week. It was a good one, and good luck out there. Hope you can stay optimistic and stay on some fish.
Okay, guys. Well, thanks for having me on.
This week's Hey Cap was brought to us by Daycool Heating and Air. I love getting questions from our readers to ask all the fishing specialists we have on the show each week. There's nothing like going to the expert to shorten the learning curve. Just like the specialists on the fishing report each week, Daycool Heating and Air are home performance specialists. What does that mean? That means they will inspect your property and find leaking air ducts, hoses, clean out ductwork, and find the HVAC problems before they become nightmares. So check out the heating and cooling specialists who bring you the inshore, offshore, and onshore fishing specialists each week. And mention this ad for a free home performance diagnostic. Contact them at 251-633-5121 or check them out online at www.daycoolair.com or on the Daycool Heating and Air mobile app, and their license number AL07028. All right, man. Hey Cap, let's see. This week's Hey Cap comes from Michael Zogby Jr. This was on our Facebook page. He posted on one of those posts I made over there. Michael says, how do you clean your fishing gear after a productive trip? I've heard to run water over the rods and reels lightly. I've heard to wash them with soap to get the salt off. Is salt away? That's a product, right?
That's right.
Is salt away a good idea? I've also been told to dunk the reels in a bucket of fresh water. What's the quote, right way to keep your equipment in tip-top shape?
So my answer to that is, number one thing you can just like erase off of that list is dunk your reels in a bucket of fresh water.
It's going to push all the natural lubrication in those reels out, right?
Yeah, it's going to grease emulsifies when you mix it with water, and it's going to make it dry out. So it's going to cut down your service intervals quite a bit. You're going to have to go get them serviced after that happens. Just about any time I ever have a reel fully immersed in the water, whether it's fresh or salt, I'm usually taking that reel apart and cleaning up all that old grease out of there and going back with new, because once it gets in there, it ain't coming out, especially if you use it after that, because that you're just mixing water with grease and it gets milky, and it's not gonna have the same properties it had before. I think Salt Away is a good product. I would just say with any of this stuff, you don't want to go overboard. You don't want to be out there spraying like right down in your reels, because you're forcing water in there. And that's right. And so I think just a real light rinse off is fine. Now, I have seen it where I've been like in the Gulf and you're in like true, really, really, really salty environment. Like I would say inshore in Alabama, we rarely have a very, very, very salty environment. We have
you're not taking waterfalls to spray over the bow usually in the Bay and Mississippi Sound and normal wear and tear either.
Yeah, that's right. When you get out in the Gulf and stuff, you're definitely getting a lot of salt caked up on everything. And that happens with your rods and reels. What I'll do sometimes is I've got a foam gun, you know what I mean, where you spray in just suds. I'll lightly spray my rods and reels off when that happens. And then immediately I'll kind of come back behind and rinse them off. And I would do that. I would treat the Salt Away the same way. Lightly do it. You know what I mean? Just lightly spray everything off with the Salt Away or your soap, and then lightly spray it off with water. A little bit goes a long way, I feel like, with that regard. Then the other thing, just caring for your gears. Make sure you clean it. Bring it to your reel, to whoever does your reel, rod and reel maintenance. And man, I know I constantly have a reel in my shop here that I need to take apart and clean all the time. I've kind of taught myself to do it. A couple of friends have helped me. Buddy John Burke, who does he used to do all my rod and reel maintenance before he taught me how to do all this stuff. But I would use pretty much like 2 or 3 different kinds of reels. So I've gotten to where I can take them apart, put them back together. It's really not that hard. Very intimidating first, but it's really not that hard. You can pull up a schematic for anything and teach yourself how to put it back, and there's a ton of videos online.
Oh yeah,
that you can teach yourself to do that with. But I would just say overall, lighter is better than dunking it in there or spraying it off with a power washer or something of that nature,
Right. Just knock the salt off. I mean, they're made to be exposed to that type of exposure. So if you don't dunk them or anything like that, just rinse them and wipe them off.
Yeah, more water is going to, like we were talking about, is going to get into the reel, emulsify that grease, make it milky, make it fail. And then you're going to get corrosion and stuff like that if you don't stay ahead of it and keep your maintenance up. So that'd be my tip.
All right. This week's Hey Cap was brought to us by Advanced Transmission in Spanish Fort. Give the professionals a call who have been trusted on the Gulf Coast for over 25 years at 251-623-5122 626-6061 or check them out online at www.advanced-transmission.com. All right. Lawrence Smith is going to bring us the Hey Cap question this week. Lawrence says, "Hey Cap, when fishing the deep structure around the bay, what is the best method to finding the depth of the fish, especially at the deeper rigs?"
The structure is in the bay and the sound is the 4 R's: rigs, wrecks, reefs, and rock piles.
That's right.
You didn't get it?
W.
Rex.
I got it.
You got it. I can't believe it, man.
Hey,
Butch ain't no grad, buddy. He's sharp, buddy. You
If
sharp
there's
as
one-
you're about sharp as a
Butch
bowling
got it
ball.
real
I can
quick.
tell you, it didn't go past him. But that you could, he said rigs, but you could throw in any of that kind of structure. Oh, and I guess we could call it the 5 R's because you got the reefs, wrecks, rigs, rock piles, and range markers, right?
Range markers.
Yeah,
That's what I was thinking too.
The 5 R's. Yeah.
Yep, all kind of them R's.
Yeah, I picked this question from Lawrence because I knew I was going to have Captain Bobby on today, and I figured y'all could nerd out on it. What you think, man?
Yeah, I think that's a great question.
It's applicable. I think that's about to be coming up here
timely,
pretty
starting
soon.
to move into that time of the year. So how am I going to find the fish at the depth? So if I have free range of the structure without any other boats on it, I'm going to turn my Ray Marine to side vision, down vision, sonar, all of that onto my machine. Like I'll have it divided up into 3 quadrants, and I'm going to either if it's shallower, say like 8 foot deep and less, I'm probably just going to drop the trolling motor over, kill the big motor, and just troll the motor around that area for maybe just take and cover the whole thing if you need to. I mean, some of these reefs aren't really big, and you can cover them with the trolling motor in probably 2 or 3 minutes. And looking at your electronics, a lot of times you're going to see a zone where you're marking fish more consistently, and they could be. Sometimes you got to look at it. You got to look at it real close because sometimes they're going to be really, really tight to the bottom. And those fish typically going to try to catch with a slip cork that I've got set basically on the bottom where it's just like barely skimming the bottom and not getting hung up. But utilizing those electronics is how I'm going to go about any open reef or rig or wreck or whatever, where I can take a look, scan it, see where I see my biggest marks, my best looking fish. And it takes some time. I mean, we talk about it a lot. You got to get to know your electronics to understand what your particular setup looks like and where you're going to see fish. But doing it as a practice every single time and then trying to identify them is going to be helpful. So say, for instance, I make a pass over a wreck that's 10 or just say 12 feet deep, and I mark fish pretty steadily at 8 feet deep. Well, and I have say three customers on the boat. I'm not going to set a slip cork at 8 feet deep and put all 3 people at 8 feet deep. I'm going to set one slip cork at 8 feet deep. I'm probably going to have one of them even throw a popping cork because you never know when there's going to be one up higher. And then I'm going to have one, if the conditions allow it, where it's not too windy or too swift a current, then I'm going to go with a free line shrimp. And all of those are going to help me kind of cover the water column pretty well. But if that 8 foot deep slip cork gets hit first, then I'm going to pretty much just go with, hey, I was right at what I read on my machine, and that's where the fish are. And I'll probably go ahead and get at least the second angler switched over to that 8 foot deep slip cork. And then probably I need to see at least one more bite at that depth before I take my third angler off of whatever he or she was doing to commit fully into that. But a lot of times what you're going to find is you're going to see where there's going to be some marks kind of throughout the water column, or you may see more bait in one area and a free line or just a little tiny split shot on a free line shrimp or pogie or whatever your bait of choice is, something that where you can literally throw it out, it's going to land and slowly sink all the way to the bottom. If you're covering the water column really slowly, then it doesn't really, it's not as, it doesn't have to be as precise as saying, all right, I have to have my slip cork set at 8 feet deep, because these fish may be kind of moving up and down through the water column, and you're just going to present a bait that's sinking slowly through the water that they're going to find as it sinks past them. So that's essentially what I'm going to do on any rig or reef or any type of structure that's, say, like 6 feet deep and deeper.
And I'll tell you what, that's exactly right. Typically you're going to find that to Lawrence's question, you're going to find that they're going to be in the lower third of the water column. So if you're fishing a 10 or 12 foot deep piece of structure, you're going to want to fish 8 to like Patrick was talking about, where you're just ticking the bottom right there. But there is the occasion where sometimes, and I find that it happens typically when it's like mirror slick calm and there's no tide, those fish will move way up in the water column. And a shallow popping cork, it's very rare when you got a lot of current that they'll move that high up in the water column. Typically, you're going to find them in the lower third
with more current.
With more current, and but if you catch those mirror slick days where the cork won't even move, that's when I put on a popping cork. But the other thing, like Patrick mentioned too, this is what I do. I do exactly what he's talking about. He's covering the whole water column with his anglers, and that's one of the advantages that we do have as guides, because we're going to have multiple anglers on the boat, and so I can do testing. I can do it, and it's amazing sometimes, even in something like a 12-foot rig, where 1 foot of depth will make a difference. 1 foot will make a difference. You can put a slip cork at 8, 10, 11, and 12, and the guy at 11 is getting bit and nobody else is, and it's amazing. Now, sometimes it doesn't matter. When they're eating the rod tips off, as long as you're close, you're okay. Right. But there are times when that 1 foot makes a difference, and to what Patrick said, he talked about it. He said, pay attention to the guy that's getting the bite, because that's where you need to have everything set. Yep. And I'm lucky if I even have my sonar turned on. So I'm not nearly as adept as Patrick and some of those guys are. They've gotten really good at finding fish with those electronics. I'm not nearly there yet, so I still do it kind of the old-fashioned ways. I'll make several drifts at different depths. And to his point, that's exactly what you're going to find is they're going to want it at a certain depth, and it can vary from day to day or time of the day, time of the tide. So you got to kind of play around with those depths a little bit.
I'm gonna extract a tip that I learned yesterday from Captain Bobby. I learned that from you yesterday about how to know how far down your slip cork is. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Well, because I was fussing with it.
Yeah. Well, when you're setting a slip cork, in a slip cork rig, I got them on my website, Patrick. I'm sure you do too. It's, we don't have enough time to explain how to rig one up. So you want to go look at the diagram. But the gist of it is there's a little piece of thread or whatever type of stopper you're using. I use the thread type that I tie on the line. And so
that's going to stop your cork from going any further.
In other words, your line will go through till it hits a bead, then hits the cork and blah, 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 all the way down. So that bead, that thread is adjustable, and that's how you change your depth. And so to make it real easy, if you wanted to put, if you were fishing a 15-foot rig, you would go, okay, well, here's my stopper. I'm going to put it at the end of my rod, and I got to have 15 feet of line laying all over the boat.
Which is what I did yesterday.
Well, and everybody does that, But if you take I'm using, it doesn't matter what length rod you're using, but let's just say I was using a 7-foot rod, and just assume that the butt of the rod is 18 inches. So that leaves me 5.5 feet up to the tip from the butt, and then 5.5 feet back down. So what I do is we put the bobber stopper reel it up till it's right at the start of the butt, and then put the hook next to that. That's 11 feet. 5.5 up, 5.5 down. And it's all right there on the rod. So if I need 2 more feet, I can just pull it out that way or shallow it up 2 feet. So you don't have all that line laying all over the place. And by the time you do all that, as you well know, and anybody that's ever done it, when all that crap's laying around on the boat, guess what happens to it? It all gets tangled.
You're going to get a triple.
Everybody.
Hookup too.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You got everybody tangled up. So it's just a real easy way to measure it off. If you got whatever length of rod you do, just measure it off, just double it up and down on your rod, and it's a real easy way to get your depth set real quick. And one other thing on depth, and this happened to us yesterday, by the way, and I don't remember who it was, but who was it, Jay, that caught a big red fish?
Jay caught a big red.
Jay. All right, so what happens a lot of times with those stoppers, when you hook a big fish like a red, like he did, or a jack, and they're pulling, that cork is pushing that knot up the line. And so you'll find you go like, wait a minute, all of a sudden now I'm at 30 feet. So, and it not just on a big fish, but a lot of times when you're on a hot bite, you know, you want your bobber stopper tight enough that it doesn't slip, but not so tight that you can't adjust it. So pay attention to your depth sometimes. You'll notice sometimes you're catching fish, and all of a sudden you're not. Yeah, and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So just every once in a while, just after you catch a fish and you go to bait up, just make that quick check with your line, make sure you're at the right depth, and you go back to fishing. Because like you said, you just change that depth just a little bit sometimes, and you'll get right out of the fish.
Yep.
I see it every single year. Every year, every time we're catching fish on slip corks, that I've got somebody that gets real hot and they're catching fish, and all of a sudden they go cold. And I've got somebody else catching fish occasionally, and then I go back to the person that was catching fish like crazy and find that they're not slid up or down or whatever. I mean, it could be as small as 2 feet.
Yep.
1.5 feet, 2 feet means a world of difference in the slip cork world. And man, I mean, you can go from whacking them every cast to not catching anything, and then make that adjustment, fix that, and then get them back in their zone where they were hot, and then they go right back to catching.
Absolutely. Yep. We've seen it. And so, you know, that's the thing is keep an eye on that depth, man. When you get them dialed in, you know, make sure you know what depth you were at in case it does slip, you know, because it's going to make a difference.
Yep. Oh, yeah. That's
right.
That's a
and
great
I do
answer.
the same thing, measuring with my rod. I use pretty much all 7-foot rods for my slip corks, and just measure it by the length of the rod, and
Let her dig.
And go from there. You don't have to have lines strung out from one end of the boat to the other.
Whatever.
Hey, you ain't the only one. You're not the only one.
Well, I figured if I could, put my hook on the trolling motor and run it back 25 feet, then I could know where.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's
all
what
right,
people do.
Well, Bobby, I got a question for you. The slip cork depth is always always a little bit of an interesting conversation. Everybody measures it a little bit different. Do you measure your depth to the hook or to the weight?
I measure it to the hook, and it's funny you say that, because one time Richard and I were fishing. I don't know how we ended up fishing together, and I'm going like, no, you and so and my brother does the same thing. He measures it to the weight, and they're going like, well, no, the shrimp's swimming around, so the depth is set to the weight.
I see that too.
Yep.
Yeah, I measure it to the hook, and is what I've always done.
I say the hook because. Yeah. Well, the hook's going to be what gets caught on the bottom.
Well, yeah, that's right. And that's, to me, that weight of that hook is going to keep that shrimp down there. Well, what do you do?
I go to the weight.
Do you? That's wild.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I always go to the weight.
Well, let me ask you this. So if you say you're fishing a 12-foot deep rig or wreck or whatever you're fishing, 12-foot piece of structure, so you want to fish it at 8 feet, or 10 feet, you're putting the weight at 10 feet.
That's right.
Yeah, that's wild.
I'm putting the weight at. I measure everything to the weight, and then I manage. If I start getting hung up, then it usually tells me that my bait isn't able to keep up with my hook size or something like that. So then I may have to downsize on my hook to where my bait can swim my hook and keep it up out of the structure.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. So I've had that conversation, and really I think the first time I ever talked about it was either to my brother or with Richard, and I was going like, no, it's to the hook. I mean, so there's no right or way. It's just whatever you like to do, but mine's always to the hook, so.
I like fine. It. Everybody has their own way.
That's it. I mean, I don't. It's kind of like
Kyle Mennernight. He always measured it to the hook too.
Yeah.
So he and I were working on a trip one day, and he called me and was like, "Man, this bite's pretty hot over here. It's 8 feet deep." And I come over there and set mine 8 feet deep and couldn't get a bite. And I was like, "Wait a minute, are you to the weight or to the hook?" He said, "To the hook. That's the only way to measure it." And I dang sure, man, I've measured it out 8 feet to the hook and started catching them.
That's right. But for you would have been in your case, for example, if you're using a 2-foot leader, you'd have been. He should have told you, or vice versa. He should have told you 6 feet. So it doesn't matter. And like I said, as long as you're both talking apples to apples, you know, and
you just got to know.
Yeah, yeah, that's funny.
That's a
good.
That's awesome, Captain Patrick. I love that conversation there. I'm glad we got off on that. Man, that's a great report and a great Hey Cap question. This week's Hey Cap is brought to us by Fishbites. Are you tired of scrambling for bait whenever you decide to go fishing? Have an artificial bait that's better than live bait ready to go at a moment's notice with Fishbites. It's easy to pack and travel with, and it's shelf stable, and not to mention tough. With Fishbites, the bite stays on the hook and the fish stay on the bait. Check out the full line of scented saltwater and freshwater baits at tackle at fishbites.com. All right, Captain Richard. Got the Hey Cap question this week.
Woo-hoo!
This week's Hey Cap question comes from Rusty Tweedy. He says, hey, Cap, when trout and redfish transition from shallower water to deeper areas, do they still migrate to the same types of structure, i.e. grass, sandy bottom, deeper oyster beds, etc., or are they looking for different ingredients once the water hits a certain temperature? What you think? Because that's kind of happening right now, right? Or it's happening or happened?
Right. Yeah. So for me, when they start to transition into deeper water, they are to an extent around the same structures. So when I think deep water, I'm thinking rocks. I'm thinking any type of vertical structure, which you have both of those ingredients out in the bay around the gas platforms. And you've got vertical structure, plus the state has gone and put a bunch of rocks out, a bunch of limestone around some of those platforms. And then there are some deeper water oyster shells, oyster beds. And I always revert back to the hotspots map. That's a good way to start finding some of that deep water oyster shell. There's not a ton of it around, but there is some. So that's something to look forward to look for. As far as grass goes, I don't really fish any deep water grass. I don't know that we have any deep water grass around. I'm definitely not fishing over sand in deep water. And I consider deep water like, 6, 8, 10 foot of water or more to that degree. And most of the time I'm fishing a slip cork or a free line with a split shot around those structures seems to work the best for me. So they are still hitting on kind of the same things as far as like rocks and structure goes, but
you got to be able to find it.
Deep water stuff. What's that?
You got to be able to find it. That hotspot map's a great resource for finding those deep oysters,
man,
like you were saying.
Great tool. Yep, I've got one, man, and most people would probably think, Captain don't need to look at a hotspot map, man, but I do. I pull it out all the time just to remind myself of different areas to go and find that type of stuff, because it's you kind of get into a groove of things and you forget about a lot of stuff, and looking at a map definitely refreshes my memory all the time of new things to go look at.
Yep.
And then there's also a lot of like wrecks and stuff like that, especially in the Mississippi Sound. There's a bunch of old shrimp boats, and there's like the Whackin'em Reef that's out there that the state put out. That's a deep water structure. There's another deep water structure in Pelican Bay over there behind Sand Island. So some of those wrecks are really good. Actually, some of those wrecks were really good last week down in Mississippi Sound. And there's a couple of them are marked, and there's some that are unmarked down there. You got to look at your map and find those coordinates and stuff. But that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's a great question. We appreciate that, Rusty. That's a great answer, Captain Richard. This week's Hey Cap question is brought to us by Alabama Deep Sea Fishing Rodeo. It's getting to be that time of year. The rodeo will be July 16th through the 19th, and the Roy Martin Young Anglers Tournament will be July 11th. The rodeo open competition is $50 per angler, and there are additional jackpot competitions for big game, king mackerel, red snapper, and speckled trout. Tickets are available online at fishingchaos.com and will be available early next week at the following retail outlets: Academy of Mobile, Academy of West Mobile, Academy in Foley, Greer's at Foul River, Tackle This, Shoot That, and Quince, as well as the rodeo site. All right, Captain Bobby, this week's Hey Cap question comes from Lester Kirk. Lester Kirk asks, hey Cap, is it true wind from the east fish bite the least in your experience?
Put your seatbelt on, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. Well, I tell you this, that's the old fisherman saying, but we got to say it down in South Alabama, that if the wind from the east, the fish bite least. If the wind's from the west, they bite the worst.
I've always heard west is the beast or something like that.
Yeah, it's terrible, man. I know, Butch, you offshore guys, or from what I gather, the offshore guys like the west wind. Man, it is just a killer down at the lower end of the bay. So there's probably something to that. I don't know if those old timers came up with that, but man, it is exactly opposite down in South Alabama. We, you know, and it could have a lot to do with water clarity, but I mean, when I see W in any forecast, whether it be southwest, which is what we had today, west, northwest you can somewhat live with, but west, southwest is just a killer down there. And it's not, I don't know if it's so much that the fish don't bite, but it just destroys our water clarity. And if we're trout fishing, particularly where you got a fish that's an ambush feeder and really relies on a sense of sight to feed, that just kills the bite. Even the old timers, and I'm an old timer, and these are guys older than me, used to say they wouldn't even leave the house if it was blown out of the west or southwest, just because it would shut everything down, So I don't, so to answer his question directly, if they bite least, east is something with east in it is what I really like to fish, So I look forward to getting that. We get that a lot in the spring, by the way, is typically we get, unless it's pre-front, like where we're at right now, but typically we get a lot of east and southeast, northeast winds. That is to me, is where the fishing really gets good. And it's probably got as much to do with water clarity as anything else. But no, I'm gonna have to disagree with that old. As far as trout fishing down in South Alabama, I'm gonna have to totally disagree with that.
Yeah, we always said offshore. East is the beast. I remember what it is now. East is the beast, and west is the best. That's what we used to say offshore.
Man, that's funny. That's funny because Capt, Bobby, and I, we seem to ask each other the same questions or thinking the same things a lot of times when it comes to what we're doing. And man, anytime that we see that east anything, northeast, straight east, southeast, it don't matter how hard it's blowing in one of those directions. There is a lot of doors that open up for us on an east wind, and I just get tickled when I see anything east. And when we see, and like we were talking about earlier, I always tell everybody anything west is the kiss of death. You know what I mean? Absolutely the kiss of death. Yeah. And I don't, and that's something Bobby and I talked about a lot together over the years is why is it that when it blows out of the west that, and it doesn't even have to blow out of the west a whole lot, that the fish turn off or that the water gets extremely dirty. It could be blowing the same out of the east somewhere, and the water stays clean for some reason. It blows my mind. I don't know why. It's got to be something to do with that current in the Mississippi Sound and the wind direction, but that east wind opens so many doors, and a lot of people really they believe that old timer story of the wind from the east, fish bite the least, and I jump up and down excited for an east wind.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got some guys, and I'm sure we got plenty of listeners on the eastern shore of Mobile Bay that are going like, yep, they're right. Yeah. You get west on that eastern shore of Mobile Bay, those guys go like, oh man, I don't even want to get out of bed, but but it is nuts. I mean, and it can literally happen almost overnight, even in the places that normally hold clear water. You get, it starts flowing double digits, west, southwest, in the morning. By the time the morning comes around, everything's trashed,
Absolutely.
Cool. All right, Bobby, we appreciate that Hey Capt question. Lester Kirk is going to get a prize pack from the Slick Lure. Lester, make sure you email us
All right, Capt, Bobby, Chris, I want your input on this too, man. I think this is going to be a pretty good question. This week's Hey Capt comes from DJ Hill. He commented on our Facebook page over there, Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report. He said, hey, Capt, when fishing for reds or trout with artificial hard baits, do you have instances where fish will chase the bait but not strike? If so, what do you do to fix this?
First part of the question, yes, it happens quite a bit. You see it, the subsurface baits, you'll see them follow it up sometimes, and you see it a lot with top water baits to where they're striking on, hitting it and they're slapping at it and that sort of thing. You're just not hooking up. So, number one, yes, it happens quite a bit. The good news is that he's on fish. If that's happening, you're around fishing, you're real close to being able to catch them. You're simulating the bite. So you can do the things that he just mentioned is the things that I do. You can adjust your bait. You can, I'm not a big guy on going down in line size. It might have, the areas that I fish, most of it's the water's not that clear, so the fish are typically line shy. So I'm not a big guy on going down on line size. I don't know where he fishes, but some of the areas maybe, and Chris can jump in here, but because I know the water's a good bit clearer over on that side and further to the east of us, and that may be something that would really help. But one of the things that the first thing that I would do is just adjust your presentation with the lure that you got. If the fish are following it up or striking at it, it's like they do a lot of times on the top water bait. Work in a pause, maybe change the tempo of how you're working the top water bait, slow it down, maybe speed it up, but work it. One of the things I always think of is I work in a pause. I'll start working in a pause, hop it 4 or 5 times and pause, and start watching what happens and seeing if those fish are striking in and actually getting hooked. And the same way with the subsurface hard baits is trying to work in some kind of pause, speed it up or slow it down. And then I would maybe upsize or down, probably downsize my bait if they're chasing it, maybe downsize the bait just a little bit, go from a like a full size slick maybe to the small slick, or if you're using like a Mirrodine, go from an XL to the regular size or something along that line, maybe just drop down in size of the lure, and that may make a difference. To me, the first thing I'm going to do is change my presentation, though. That's the first thing I'm going to do because I know I'm that close to getting bit. So, or actually not getting bit, but actually catching the fish. So that's probably the main thing that I would do.
I love it. Chris, you got anything to add to that about your east side?
I mean, Bobby kind of hit it all on the head. I'm with him on not dropping leader size.
It's his first time fishing.
Yeah. I'm with him on leader size. I never drop leader size. I do not personally believe, like, especially with redfish and trout, I don't think dropping from, say, 20-pound fluorocarbon to 12-pound is going to make the difference in you getting bit and not getting bit. I've caught too many specks, especially on the beach front. I've caught too many trout on 50-pound monofilament leaders while surf fishing to believe that it's the line size. But whereas Bobby talks about, changing the tempo, that's spot on. I mean, the reason a fish hits a hard bait most of the time is reaction strike. So you've got the fish's attention. He's showing you by following it that you've got something he likes.
He's
interested.
At least
he likes it. He's interested. But you're doing something in that retrieve that's giving that little pea-sized brain of his a moment to think, I better not do this. And I'm going to agree with what Bobby said about working in a pause if I'm fishing in stained water. But when I'm over here on the east side fishing clear grass flats, fishing the beachfront, I do the exact opposite. I actually speed the lure up because in this clean water, I feel like my fish is getting too good a look at my bait. He's having too much time to process it. You've got to make the fish's mind up, get that reaction strike. If I'm working, a twitch bait or a jerk bait and I'm giving it kind of a, that 2x2, 2x3, style retriever, I'm twitching it twice, pausing for 2 to 3 seconds. I'm going to ditch the pause altogether. I'm just going to do a continuous twitch, almost like you're working the top water. And I may even speed the retrieve up even beyond that. And it seems like I get a better shot at the fish actually finally committing to the lure by speeding it up and getting that reaction strike.
That's good stuff. I love it.
That is good stuff right there, man. I'll tell you, that is, man, I'm sitting here nodding my head going like, that's exactly right, man. Because like what he's talking about, you don't want to give, even if we can make these, or not we, that I manufacture a lure, but the lure manufacturers can build a lure that really looks just like looks just like a mullet or a pogey or whatever it is that they're eating on. But what Chris is talking about, he don't want to give them a real good look at that bait because sooner they're going to see the hooks. And so what he's talking about in that clear water is not giving them a real good look at that lure. That's great stuff right there, dude. That's classic right there. That's just great information. That's kind of stuff you pick up on this report right here. And I'm sitting there nodding my head going, he's exactly right. That's clear water, that's exactly the way to work one of those lures.
Yep. Let me ask you both guys something. I want to get your opinion on something. I actually had a buddy, Pat, texted me earlier. He knew that both of you guys were going to be on. And him and his brother have been in an epic battle about hook color. He likes the black hooks, and his brother likes the gray and gold and bronze. What do y'all think? Do y'all for artificial live bait, anything? Do you ever have any preference on your hook color?
Bobby,
I like the darker colored hooks myself. You know, I'm kind of a hook changer, and the big thing. First of all, let me back up. I like, you know, my favorite color is sharp. You know, as long as they're sharp, I'm good.
Yeah.
You know, but the manufacturers put cheap hooks on lures. I mean, they're going to put the cheapest hooks they can find on those lures, and so I'm like a notorious hook changer. And so the first thing I look for is sharp, and I like going to, you know, like a black. To me, it's just a black because black reflects the least amount of light, which means it's going to be harder to see. So when I change my hooks, I'm putting a black chrome hook on there, a black hook, and is what I do. But, you know, I very, you know, rarely, unless I'm just fun fishing or something, I might leave the manufacturer's hooks on there. But if I change the hooks, I'm usually going to put a black, you know, all of my replacement hooks are black or black chrome hooks.
Just think, Chris.
Well, I'm 100% in agreement with them. All of my lures pretty much end up with black nickel or black chrome hook. And I'm really glad, like, I like this question because I have a little bit of experimentation there. You know, I throw a lot of wake baits, you know, for redfish, for trout. I think it's just a perfect search bait, especially in shallow water where you might be around grass, be around bottom structure that you're trying to get a pretty aggressive retrieve, but, you know, you don't want to go too deep, obviously, too. And the thing about that wake bait is you can crawl it over all that shallow, you know, structure. But anyway, getting to the point, recently, you know, I've been throwing a new wake bait made by Uzuri. It's just called the surface minnow. And it looks kind of like a crystal minnow or any kind of general jerk bait, but it has that vertical lip on it like a wake bait. Well, they come with these silver, and they're good quality hooks, but they're bright silver. And I threw this lure when I first got it, probably for 2 weeks, and caught one speckled trout on it. And I'm looking at the action of this bait. This bait works. I know it attracts fish. Why am I not catching fish on it? So I took the stock hooks off. I put the Berkeley Fusion or whatever. Anyway, just so you can throw whatever, you know, good quality black nickel hooks on it. And I think every trip after that, if I didn't catch at least a dozen fish on that lure, you know, it was a fluke. So, you know, there's variances from day to day, but you can't possibly tell me that, you know, that the fishing was that much different, the fish were that much different from those God knows how many trips to when I change the hooks. The lure catches fish every trip now.
Right.
So I 100% agree with Bobby. And black nickel hooks, that low reflection on it, very stealthy, and once again, sharp.
That's right. Sharp. Well, awesome, man. Yeah, that's a great report. You got anything to add to the hook thing, Capt, Bobby?
The only other thing I was going to ask Chris is when you change your hooks on that, do you generally keep the same size as hooks as the manufacturers? If you change take their hooks off and change the hooks, do you keep the hooks the same size?
Bobby, I'm going to go total fish nerd here. You're probably going to regret that you asked me that. But yeah, I try to go. Not only do I try to go. Right.
Chris Vesse being a fish nerd. Come on, man, you got to be kidding. Yeah.
So I not only try to go the same size, but more than anything, and here's what people don't realize: weight. The weight of the hooks that you change them at can make a very big difference on like a top water lure, on a suspending bait. You know, your suspending bait went from where it was sinking at, say 8 to 10 inches a foot. You put these new stock hooks or these new upgrade hooks. Now it's sinking 13 to 14 inches every second. And, you know, when you have that much difference, another half a foot to a foot on your paws, and you're fishing 4 or 5 feet of water, you know, your lure's on the bottom, you're snagging up more often, you get more grass on it. So yeah, I always try to not only get hooks that are about the same size, but more importantly is the weight has got to be close if you want to keep the same kind of depth on the retrieve.
Same sink rate and everything. Yep.
Yeah, it changes everything. That's awesome, man. We're gonna have to charge for this episode. I know it's usually free, but I have to get some money for this stuff. Man, that's awesome. DJ Hill, thank you for the question, the initial question about the fish trying to hit the lure. DJ is going to get a prize back from the Slick Lure. DJ, make sure you email us your address at alabama@bestfishingreport.com, and we'll get that prize package out to you. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed the show. Like I said, this was your guys' show. Thank you for all your HACAP submissions. We really enjoy them. Keep the knot questions coming. We hope to do some more videos soon with a couple of our guides and contributors. Hope you guys have a safe 4th of July. Like I said, you guys please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'll be back next week with the regular scheduled fishing report. You guys make sure and get your HACAP questions in. Email us at alabama@bestfishingreport.com. And if you win that HACAP question prize, we'll get you a Slick Lure prize package. You guys have a safe 4th and keep whacking them. We'll see you next week.
This week's Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report has been brought to you by
Foster Contracting, Fortified Roofing Pros. Did you know you could save up to 40% on your homeowner's insurance with a fortified roof? Learn more at fortifiedroofingpros.com or call them at 251-973-9999. Also brought to you by Hilton's Real-Time Navigator, bringing you the highest quality online satellite fishing chart since 2004. Your source for sea tips, altimetry, currents, and watercolor at hiltonsoffshore.com.
This week's Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report was brought to you by me, Joe Baya, and National Land Realty. If I can help you in any way with the purchase or sale of land in Alabama or Florida, whether it's timberland, farmland, recreational land like hunting land, or even agricultural land or ranch land like horse farm, drop me a message at jbaya@nationalland.com. That's JBAYA@nationalland.com. And also, KillerDock. Are you suffering from dock dysfunction? Check out a full line of dock enhancement at KillerDock.com. That's KillerDock.com.
This week's Alabama Saltwater Fishing Report was brought to you by me, Captain Bobby Eberscotto, and A-Team Fishing Adventures. If you want to get in touch with us, book a trip, or just pick up some information, check out our website, which is www.ateamfishing, all one word, ateamfishing.com. You can book a trip there or get some great information.